I could stand up here today and tell you that this is a debate about hypocrisy or consistency in principles and how that plays out on an international playing field. But in reality, this is a debate in which we ask ourselves what it was that we fought for all those years if it was not freedom, and where we draw the line between pretending to care about something so that we can save face and actually caring about thousands of people suffering throughout the world and actually taking a stance. And that is why we say we would cut ties with countries that have homophobic laws, which we would define as any country where it is explicitly illegal to be homosexual, whether the punishment for that be a fine, corporal punishment, or the death sentence or jail time. We say we cut ties with them, and by cutting ties, we mean we would actively boycott any events that they host. Moreover, we say we would refuse to negotiate with them. As the first country in the world to constitutionally ban discrimination on the grounds of sexuality, we say we cannot turn our back on our people. We cannot turn our back on the rainbow, and we cannot turn our back on the South African flag. That is why we say that even if we can't change the homophobic laws in these countries, they have to come up and tell us today why we shouldn't change the way we negotiate with these countries, even if it's not for their sake, and even if we can't better that situation, why we shouldn't act to better who we are and to better our country. So what I'm going to be showing you today is firstly in terms of why we have a responsibility to do this, secondly why we should do it for our own sake even if there is no principle involved, and moreover why we should do it for the sakes of the people within those countries. And my second speaker is going to talk to you about restriction of movement and an impotence for global change. So that brings me on to this first argument in terms of responsibility. Essentially what we bring to you today is that we have the responsibility to cut these ties, and what they need to deal with in this debate is the actual principle behind this. They can't just talk about utilitarian issues. So the first thing we need to look at in terms of this argument is the nature of diplomatic ties. So here we say that the aim of a diplomatic tie with a country is so that two countries can further a shared ideal within the international playing field and in an international community to push it forward and advance that issue. So we say that when we don't cut diplomatic ties with these countries, we actively condone those laws. We think that's problematic. We think we need to remove that. We don't think that's good. As a country that's specifically against that, we can't allow we can't continue to condone these actions. We need to cut ties with these countries on that ground. But secondly, we say that we need to be consistent. And the reason behind that is because as the first country to specifically ban discrimination on the grounds of sexuality, we need to act. That is the principle that we hold. We are a country that doesn't condone homophobia in and of itself. So we then ask that when our constitution and when we have this kind of attitude as a South African nation, what then happens when we're inconsistent with it? We say that when we draw that inconsistency, when we say that sometimes homophobia is okay, sometimes attacking people is okay, we say that at that point we lose that principle on a grander scale. We say that at that point we can no longer claim to be a country that isn't homophobic, and we can no longer take that moral high ground. We think we need to be consistent in this principle if we want to have it at all. We think that's incredibly important. As a country, as South Africa, we specifically cut ties with countries throughout the world who didn't uphold ideas of equality. So we say we need to be more careful. I'll take you in a moment. We say we need to watch for this principle because we think this is incredibly important. Yes?
Please tell us why you chose to define the topic in a way that only boycotts events and not boycott entire interactions, including economic interactions.
Okay, fine then. So here's our stance on that. So if you can show us that this would also, so what we say is that we'll also cut economic ties in a situation where this also affects the principle, right? So we say we don't like these laws, and the reason we focused on diplomacy and on diplomatic ties is because we think there's a different relationship there. So we say diplomatic ties because that's when you actively condone something, when you agree on a common ideal. We think in economic trade, that's agreeing on economic ideals, so we think it's different. But if you can show to us that it is the same, and that by agreeing with their economic policy, we also agree with their policies in terms of homophobic laws, then we say we'll cut ties on those grounds as well. So that's our stance on that. So they need to show us why we shouldn't be doing something. Moreover, we say that there's another reason why we have this responsibility. And that's simply because as a signatory of the Rome Statute, we say that we as a country have a responsibility to protect. We need to protect people from death. We need to protect people from corporal punishment based on something with which they were born. We say that when we don't harm our own people, we have to act to protect other people in that way. But let's say that there was no responsibility. Let's say that principles didn't exist. Why should we then act as a country, as South Africa, for our own sake and for our own people? So essentially what we're going to show you here is that even if you don't think we do have any kind of responsibility to protect these people, why we shouldn't do it to protect our own people. So they need to show us that that's not an issue. So in this debate, we show you that no matter who you're emphasizing in this debate, whether it's people in those countries or people within our own country, we show you why we're still winning this debate. So firstly, we'd say that it creates a precedent. So one, we've already told you why we need to have consistency in order to maintain that value for ourselves. But moreover, we say that when as a country we take an active stance about something and about an element of our constitution, which in recent years has become more and more meaningless when people forget what it was because it was decided so long ago. We say that the constitution shouldn't just be a piece of paper, but an accurate reflection of our society. That's why we say we need to take an active stance that represents that constitution. And we think that that's going to happen when we have the media showing this kind of thing, when because it is a big deal to cut ties with another country, that creates discourse in our country that shows that we take an active stance on the issue. That's how we maintain our principle. That's how we make our constitution meaningful in our country. We think that that's important. Moreover, we say that people, for the most part, do trust government. So when government takes a specific action, we think they're more likely to go along with that and listen to that. So we give more meaning to our own constitution, and we protect our own people in South Africa if they're homosexual. Moreover, we're going to show you now why we have to act for the people within those countries. For the people who were born into a country where who they are was illegal. Where who they are would mean from their birth they were doomed to die if someone caught them. This is why we have to act for that sake. So we already showed you why even if we didn't have a responsibility, and even if it doesn't work, we should act just for the sake of the principle. Now we're going to show you why it actually does impact change in that country. So they need to show us why we shouldn't care about people on a grand world scale. So we say it's going to work because as South Africa, we are a main element of we're an important element in the African context. Why? Because we're one of the most liberal countries, firstly. Secondly, we're one of the most developed country in Africa. Moreover, we're the biggest investor into Africa. So that means that we're incredibly important on an African playing field. So we think people are going to listen to us. So even if they don't change their minds about what it means to be homosexual, we say that they'll change their minds if they want our money. So we think, or if they want to share diplomatic ties with us. So we think for that sake, they're going to listen to us, even if we can't change our minds. But moreover, we say that we can change their minds. And the reason for that is because it's no longer seen as caring about your people as a Western ideal, because a specific African country is taking a stance on it. When that happens, we no longer say that caring about people is a Western ideal, but an ideal that should be global. Moreover, we think we get media coverage and we create discourse within a society. We think that's important. Even if we can't change it completely, we say that's something. Moreover, we think that culture isn't stuck in how it is. We think it can change over time. We think that first has to happen with discourse, which we create. Ladies and gentlemen, they need to come up and show us why we shouldn't care about thousands of people dying, why we shouldn't try to save their lives, and why we shouldn't act for our own sake, and why we shouldn't maintain principles of humanity.